Hey everyone, Ken Selville here today, just talking about some hedges today and what's the best type of hedge to grow between your property or just to separate a given area. And that's really what they're used for. There are a bunch of different types of plants that are really good for hedges. What I'm standing beside right here is a Brandon cedar, which are the Thuya occidentalis Brandon. And these are a variety that are kind of an older variety, not used much anymore, but they're quite fast growing actually. These particular ones are quite old. These things have got to be, I would say at least 40 years old, somewhere in that range, and they've not really been sheared much. So when we're talking about hedges, hedges need to be sheared. If you have a row of plants and the row of plants is just growing and nobody's trimming it or shearing it at all, then it's just a hedgerow. And a hedgerow is just that. Now what happens with hedgerows is that they become thin. And you can see here behind me, there's big holes in the hedge. You can see the sky right through the hedge. And that's because it's a hedgerow. It's not a hedge, so to speak. Hedges are trimmed about 5 or 6 times a year. And that shearing, the shearing effect that happens when you trim, is it just causes the branches to branch and branch and branch and to break up, making small little tufts that fill in really solid. And it's the continuous trimming that makes them solid and sturdy and strong. The key with growing a good hedge is always to grow one that's kind of pyramidal shaped, so that means wider at the bottom and narrower at the top, and nicely sheared on all sides and the top as well. And that'll make sure that the plant grows really thick right to the ground. So this is Thuya occidentalis, and this one is sort of an older variety. Now we're just going to go for a quick walk up here and have a look at another type of hedging material. We're going to look at some yews, which is taxus. These are taxus media. So these ones were just planted, and you can see they're kind of thin inside because they've been eaten by deer previously, and that's why they were removed from a property. All our old sunflowers here hanging in front. But again, we rescued these from a property. Anywhere you have deer, you can't really have yews because the yews will be eaten. And these ones were eaten right to the bare branches pretty much. And so we utilized them. We planted them in our backyard just because we needed a hedge, and we like to recycle them. But they'll take a couple years to come back actually. So just the way it goes, we'll keep working on those. So the yew trees are good because they are drought tolerant, they're shade tolerant, they're heat tolerant, they are wet tolerant, they're tolerant to pretty much everything. So that's the beauty of yew trees. Now these ones haven't thickened up yet, so they'll be nice and thick all the way down, like to the bottom once they fill out. So pros and cons to use: yes, they adapt to any conditions, but unfortunately the deer will eat them. And the foliage is nice and soft actually. Okay, so now on this side, I'm just going to stand back a bit. This is a juniper hedge. So these are our Juniperus chinensis Spartans. These are some beautiful big Spartan junipers. Let's see if I can widen the view here just a little. Spartan junipers are great, but they do get to be quite big and quite fat. So they're better more as a hedgerow than they are as a hedge that's trimmed. Because although the yews actually really like to be trimmed and can be trimmed quite readily, the junipers don't like being trimmed, and they just like to grow. So if you're going to grow a hedge and it's going to be narrow, you're better off to buy a variety of juniper called Taylor juniper, which is a nice narrow growing one. It's a little bit grayer blue foliage, and it stays narrow, so you don't really have to trim it as much. But these Spartan junipers get really big, and they're really pretty, nice dark green color. Okay, we're gonna move on. We're gonna go look at some emerald cedars next. Okay, so here we're looking at some emerald cedars, and these have just the slightest emerald green kind of color. They're a little bit softer than the Brandon cedars, but these guys grow nice and tall, and really quite a nice plant. There's some negative publicity against cedars because of their I guess they are perceived as using a lot more water, but you know, these ones, they've got a little bit of brown in them, but that's just a little bit of cedar borer that gets into them from time to time, which we have a lot of here in the valley. These plants are grown in very dry, sort of poor soil conditions, and they're doing quite well as a larger plant. So when they're large, they don't take as much water. When they're newly planted, they prefer to have regular water, like 2 to 3 times a week. And so they're like a regular irrigation type plant. Not considered to be totally drought tolerant, but moderately drought tolerant. Yeah, they're pretty easy. These guys grow a little thicker, a little denser. A lot of people like Emerald Cedars better than the Brandon Cedars, and they're pretty much all that's sold now as far as cedars go. For the regular pyramidal style, these normally grow very tall and slender, so they're an excellent option. Growth rate is about 2 to 2.5 feet a year if the conditions are good, so that's pretty fast. So yeah, they're a pretty good tree. So when you're selecting the different types of trees that are out there, you're going to be buying at different sizes, so there's a lot of factors that affect the cost of the trees, and the plants, so that sometimes is a factor. So emerald cedars and any of the pyramid cedars are really the cheapest option, and they're pretty much one of the fastest growing ones as well. So they stay narrow and they grow quite quickly, so they're a good option. The deer also eat them. So the pyramid cedars in this region, like in Western Canada, they are natural deer browse, so the deer eat them too. So yews and cedars are going to be eaten. The junipers, not so much. The deer don't eat them so much. So that's also a good option there. So we're going to go down, we're going to have a look at a couple other trees here really quick that are used for hedging. All right, now we're having a look at boxwood. Boxwoods are one of the best options for hedges. They're quite slow growing, so you have to kind of be patient with them. That's the trick with boxwoods, all about patience, but completely deer resistant. So this is a boxwood plant here, Buxus sempervirens, or something similar to that. I'll have to check on the botanical name on this one. But Buxus is the botanical name, and they are evergreen, and they're just a nice green shrub. This one has been trained, or not trained, it's just living on its own, which I always like to just let plants do their own thing. They just lived whatever shape they want to be. But if I was growing it as a hedge, I'd be trimming it and shearing it about 5 times a year, and it would be a nice shape. So when it comes to boxwoods, the key is that when you select boxwoods, you select specific types that grow to specific sizes. So if you want a little short hedge, you pick varieties that are slower growing and stay small. If you want to grow a taller hedge, you pick taller varieties that grow faster. So you have to pick the right boxwood for the right conditions. So that's the way it goes in the world. One of the plants that I really like in the boxwood category is the columnar boxwood. So they grow very narrow, like pencil shape. And there's several good varieties available of those, and they're fairly expensive in comparison to other plants, just due to their actual size. But wow, do they ever make a nice hedge, nice and narrow, really require very little trimming, and again, deer resistant, quite drought tolerant, quite durable plant. So yeah, I really like columnar boxwoods. The only thing that scares people away is the price. You have to watch for that. So you will find that plants that are often the best hedging materials are often more expensive. So boxwoods and the junipers, which are probably the two best ones, because they're also deer resistant. So for hedging, I think it's going to be a tie between those two. If you want a little bit smaller version of a hedge, you'll probably want to go with boxwood, and if you want a little bigger one, you probably want to go with the juniper variety. The other ones, again, if you want an inexpensive hedge, you'll probably go with a cedar and just have some irrigation for it. And they're fast and inexpensive, so that's one of the things that makes them popular. Okay, I think we have a couple other just quick looks at some deciduous hedges now. Alrighty, we're just up in the back part of our garden now, and we're having a look at these cotoneaster hedges. This is Peking cotoneaster, so I'll turn the camera. Okay, so in the wintertime, these are deciduous, obviously, so they lose their leaves. You can sort of see what the wood looks like. These are not sheared. This is more like a hedge row, but we do a couple shearings each season. But deciduous plants grow quite quickly. So there's two common deciduous hedges. One is the cotoneaster we're looking at. That's Cotoneaster acutifolia, or Peking cotoneaster. And the other one is the privet hedge. That's Ligustrum vulgaris. And these are just really fast growing and very inexpensive. So I would say the deciduous hedges are the cheapest, absolute cheapest you can get. And they grow quite fast. So they grow up to 4 or 5 feet a year once they get going. But of course, what you do is you just keep them trimmed. If you're trimming them all the time, they just shape right up quite quickly. So yeah, so the privet is even bigger than the cotoneaster. Privets can get up to about 15 feet or so quite quickly. And cotoneaster is a nice, about anywhere from 4 to 6 foot hedge. This one's already about 7 feet, but it's just pretty stringy. So we don't really keep it like a solid hedge. We just like it as a separation. So this is a good plant for along the fence line. Which one is the best? Well, we got the cheapest. We know what that is. It's probably going to be the cotoneaster or the privet. And they're deciduous, so that means in the wintertime they're losing all their leaves. And if we're looking at the cheapest from the evergreen category, we're probably looking at the Emerald Cedar. And that's probably the way to go there for that cost. And for, let's say, long-term and stability, deer resistance, drought tolerance, you're looking more like junipers, or you're looking at the boxwood. So boxwoods, there's so many different types. Really a good option. Now there's some broadleaf evergreens as well, and I think we're going to look at that on a completely separate video, because I know some of our favorites in there are the pyracanthas and some hollies, and really quite a selection of different types of plants that are used in the broadleaf evergreen category. Even though boxwood is a broadleaf evergreen, it's just for us in our climate, it's pretty common. So anyway, I guess that's going to be it for today. Hopefully there's some information here that's useful to you as far as hedges go. And you know, comparatively speaking, each hedge has its spot. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks again for tuning in.